Well, hello, fellow members of Indy Grit community. Um, this is part two of my installments regarding Grit for the global pandemic. And I hope that last week's video sharing about the Stockdale paradox was of some value to you last week. Um, this week, I want to begin with a quote from Peggy Noonan in the Wall Street Journal. Let me just share with you something that she said about the pandemic. It looks at the moment as if coronavirus wasn't a huge tsunami wave that was going to knock down skyscrapers, but a big welling wave that came, filled the city, changed the waterline, will recede somewhat, and well upward again. Well, I like to use her metaphor of the wave. And by the way, I think she's hit the nail on the head in terms of what this crisis will look like in the days ahead. But using her metaphor of the wave, in my mind, the Stockdale paradox that I shared with you last week would be the stance that we would take to give us a firm footing as we brace for the anticipated waves. And that stance looks like one of confidence and optimism, yet at the same time is cautious and acknowledges the dire situation that we're all in as we collectively try and withstand the waves that are coming our way and that will eventually set a new watermark that represents the new normal following this crisis. Well, today I want to share one of three character qualities that I believe are essential for leadership in a crisis. And these three character qualities are important at any time, but in these days of crisis that we face, they are absolutely essential in my judgment. And using the metaphor, I think of these three character qualities like solid rocks that you can firmly plant your feet on um, and brace yourself for the waves that are coming. And so it's important to have solid footing um, to be able to withstand those waves. And these three character qualities are those rocks that you can be sure to plant your feet on, and they are solid, rock solid. And those three character qualities are humility, curiosity, and generosity. And today I want to talk about humility, and I am going to use for this a case study of an airline crash from 1989. So here is the abbreviated version. United Airlines Flight 232, it's July 1989, takes off in the morning from the airport in Denver on its way to Chicago and continuing on to Philadelphia. Well, about an hour into the flight, the engine on the tail of the aircraft disintegrates. There's a catastrophic failure, parts go everywhere, penetrate the fuselage and sever the hydraulic lines and, leaving the aircraft essentially without control. And in the captain's seat is Captain Alfred Haynes. Haynes is a 30-plus year veteran of United Airlines, and also seated in the cockpit are Haynes' first officer and a flight engineer. And when this happens, they feel this huge jolt of the aircraft. They quickly realize that they have lost control, and they radio for help on the ground to the maintenance team that is there to support them. And the maintenance team really offers no help at all. They say, hey, look, there is no procedure for how to recover from a total hydraulic failure such as you've had. You guys are on your own. is essentially what they said. Well, that was not good news. But the three pilots persevered and were resourceful and demonstrated true grit. And in particular, they demonstrated humilities I'm going to share with you as we continue the narrative. Well, providentially seated as a passenger on this same aircraft is another United Airlines employee, Dennis Finch. And Finch is a senior pilot who evaluates other pilots. And he is in the back of the aircraft, and he is what I would call an aviation geek. And so Fitch was fascinated with the crash of a Japanese air flight that suffered a catastrophic hydraulic failure about 3 years prior. And on his own time, he had played around in the simulator, the flight simulator, to see what could be done in such a circumstance, and in particular, whether or not you could navigate the plane under those conditions using only the throttle. Well, Fitch offered his services to the flight crew, and Haynes welcomed him into the cockpit. Now, you need to understand this was the 1960s, and nobody in the 1960s was talking about collaboration or servant leadership or any of those concepts that we feel as normal today. In the 1960s, the captain of the airplane was the king of the castle. And so his inviting Fitch into the cockpit to join him as an equal was unprecedented, countercultural, remarkable, unheard of. Nevertheless, Haynes demonstrated great humility in bringing him into the cockpit and onto the team there to navigate this crisis. Well, the transcript of the radio traffic between the four pilots confirms that they worked as a solid, high-functioning team together, that they showed a great deal of teamwork and resourcefulness, humility on the part of Haynes, and amazingly, they were able to MacGyver that aircraft without any controls, using essentially just the throttles, to the Sioux City airport. And they were able to get the aircraft on the ground on an unused airstrip there at Sioux City. A remarkable feat of aviation. Now, they did not have the benefit of the landing gear being extended. They didn't have any hydraulics, and so it was a hard landing. In the landing, there were 296 passengers on the plane. Tragically, 112 died in the crash landing, but 184 survived. And to this day, leadership gurus study what went on in the cockpit for clues about leadership. And aviators study also what went on in the cockpit because it was a remarkable feat of aviation. In fact, during the crash investigation, United Airlines put 20 plus of their very best pilots in the flight simulator under similar circumstances to see if they could bring the plane down safely. None of them had any level of success to the degree that these four men did. And additionally, McDonnell Douglas, the manufacturer of the plane, put their best test pilot in the simulator, and he too couldn't come close to the feat of those four pilots. So a miraculous feat of aviation as well as a demonstration of great leadership. Well, here is my point. Um, this was a remarkable demonstration of humility. Let me just read for you what Captain Haynes had to say in a news briefing following the crash. Haynes his face was cut, bruised, he was in bandages, and here's what he said. There is no hero. There are just a group of 4 people who did their job. And it was an unusual circumstance, but we put our best resources and knowledge together and did what we thought was best. Well, Indy community, here is what I believe is our takeaway from this case study of United Air Flight 232 in July of 1989. This is what humility looks like in a crisis. This is what leaders do. In a crisis, the leader, he or she, is open to help from wherever it comes, anywhere in the organization, and whether or not it appears likely that the individual offering help has anything to offer. And so Haynes certainly had no idea of Finch's experience in the flight simulator. The plane was going down, and when he welcomed him into the cockpit, and so he didn't know what Finch's capabilities were, and Finch didn't bring a resume, but he welcomed help from anywhere in the organization, and that's what leaders do in a crisis. Additionally, they share the accolades. They share all of the credit. Haynes certainly did that in the news briefing, and as he went on to make public appearances later. The third thing that I believe we can take away from this is that leaders play to the strengths of their team. And when you say that, that implies that you're going to acknowledge and be and own your weaknesses and be transparent about that. And so there are 3 takeaways for us, I believe, from this. The idea of accepting help from wherever it comes and from whomever it comes, the idea of sharing the credit, and the idea of accepting and playing to one another's strengths, accepting your own weaknesses. Well, that is my thought for you this week, fellow members of the Indy Grit community. Here we are facing another week, and I encourage you to exercise grit. And in particular, in the week ahead, I think it will serve you well if you're open to help from wherever it comes, and express that humility to acknowledge that you don't know it all, and there may be others who can lend a helping hand, even if you doubt that the person may be helpful. Be open to receiving help, and that's what humility looks like in a crisis. Well, I wish you well in the week ahead. God willing, I'll be back this same time next week to talk a little bit about curiosity. So I wish you well. Take care in the week ahead.